Welcome and thank you for joining us. My name is Michael Bentley. I lead the U.S. Census Bureau's experiments and evaluation research that we are conducting to prepare for the 2020 census.
Greetings. My name is Nicholas Jones. I lead the U.S. Census Bureau's research and outreach for improving data on race and ethnicity. Mike and I are here today to introduce you to the Census Bureau's recently completed 2015 National Content Test and the Race and Ethnicity Analysis Report, which was released on February 28th.
We're very pleased that you've joined us to learn about the results of this important research. This video provides a detailed introduction to familiarize you with the NCT research objectives, results, and findings.
To begin our presentation, I'll provide a brief introduction of the NCT's key research dimensions and share some background and context on why we're examining these important topics. After that, Mike will present results for testing alternative versions of the race and ethnicity questions to improve design and data quality. Then, I'll present results for testing the inclusion of a distinct category for respondents of Middle Eastern or North African heritage. Then, Mike will discuss the results for testing alternative versions of question instructions and terminology. And finally, I'll bring together all of the findings to discuss optimal designs for collecting and producing data on race and ethnicity. We're excited to share with you how the findings from this research enable the Census Bureau to provide the most accurate and relevant race and ethnicity data possible to our public about our changing and diversifying nation. On February 28, 2017, the U.S. Census Bureau released the results from the 2015 National Content Test. This test explored several promising ways to improve our race and ethnicity questions so that they better measure our nation. Many Americans view race and ethnicity differently than in decades past. For many years, we've conducted research on race and ethnicity and had ongoing conversations with stakeholders across the country to discuss our research plans. These findings build upon our previous research and are instrumental in identifying ways to improve respondents' understanding of their options to report multiple race and ethnicity groups and collect more accurate data on racial and ethnic self-identification. To begin, I'll provide a brief introduction of the 2015 NCT's research dimensions, along with some important background and context as to why we're examining these key topics. Our recent research on race and Hispanic origin was prompted by a number of factors. Leading up to the 2010 census, our research team spent time analyzing data from recent censuses and American Community Survey responses. What they found was that over time, there's been a growing number of people who do not identify with any of the U.S. Office of Management and Budget race categories. This means that an increasing number of respondents have been racially classified as some other race. In fact, in 2000 and in 2010, some other race, which was intended to be a small residual group, was the third largest race category. This was fueled by the Hispanic population not identifying with any of the Office of Management and Budget race categories, and they make up the overwhelming majority of those classified as some other race. We are concerned that if no changes are made to the way we collect data on race and ethnicity, and with the projected growth of the Hispanic population, the some other race population could become the second largest race group in the 2020 census. We know that the current race question design is problematic, and not just for many in the Hispanic community. Leading up to the 2010 census, there were a number of campaigns that race and ethnic organizations and advocates launched to tell their communities how to fill out the race question. This led to developing the 2010 Census Race and Hispanic Origin Alternative Questionnaire Experiment Research, or the AQE. It's important to note that the 2010 AQE research is one of many census content tests that were focused on improving racial and ethnic data. Over the past several decades, we've conducted this research. Content tests for the census are one of the main mechanisms that the Census Bureau uses to develop research questions on the census forms in an effort to improve the data from decade to decade. This graphic illustrates a history of the major race and ethnicity content tests over the past several decades. The Census Bureau is committed to improving the accuracy of census results by researching approaches that more accurately measure and reflect how people self-identify their race and ethnicity. The 2010 AQE research was fielded as the most comprehensive research effort on race and Hispanic origin ever undertaken by the Census Bureau. The 2010 AQE research was designed to identify strategies for improving race and Hispanic origin reporting and to increase the accuracy and reliability of race and ethnicity data. The 2015 national content test research builds upon the extensive research on race and ethnicity previously conducted by the Census Bureau to examine how people in our society identify their race and ethnicity as our society grows more diverse and more complex. This research acknowledges that a number of people find the current race and ethnic categories confusing or wish to see their own specific group reflected on the census form. Some of our findings from the 2010 AQE include: combining race and ethnicity into one question did not reduce the proportion of Hispanics, Blacks, American Indians and Alaska Natives, Asians, or Native Hawaiians and other Pacific Islanders. One of the most notable AQE findings was that while the separate questions still had some other race reporting as high as 7%, the combined question designs yielded a substantially reduced some other race population under 0.5%. And white dropped to levels reflecting the non-Hispanic white population that we see in the traditional two separate question approaches. Overall, when a Hispanic category is provided as a response option within the combined question, some other race becomes one of the smallest response categories, demonstrating that a combined question is more in line with how Hispanic respondents view themselves. Another major finding of the AQE was that the combined question yielded lower non-response rates than the two separate questions approach. The combined question increased reporting of detailed responses for most groups, but decreased reporting for others. The combined question better reflects self-identity. The re-interview study and the focus group research confirmed that these reporting patterns were a closer reflection of how people self-identify. The AQE also included a series of 67 focus groups with about 800 people across the country, including Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico. Across the focus groups, participants commented that all race and ethnic groups were not treated equally in the 2010 census and felt that all groups should be treated fairly and equitably. Finally, one common theme across communities was that many respondents liked the combined question approach and felt it presented equity to the different categories, as each major group received a checkbox with examples and a write-in line where detailed responses could be provided. The overwhelming sentiment from the AQE focus groups was that a combined question provided fair and equitable treatment for all groups. Additionally, Middle Eastern and North African participants did not see themselves in the current race and ethnicity categories, and these participants often recommended a separate Middle Eastern, North African, or Arab response category. All of this research, dialogues with myriad stakeholders, and more have helped us get to where we are today, and that's what I'll discuss next. First, I'll provide a quick overview of our primary vehicle for informing content for the 2020 census, the 2015 National Content Test, or as we refer to it, the NCT. The 2015 NCT was conducted in the summer and fall of 2015 with a census day of September 1st. We employed a large nationally representative sample of approximately 1.2 million households across the country, including Puerto Rico. The sample design for the NCT included oversampling of key population groups such as Asians, Pacific Islanders, Middle Eastern and North African populations, Blacks, Hispanics, and American Indian and Alaska Native populations. We tested key census content areas for the 2020 census, and we connected the 2010 census AQE research with the 2015 NCT goals and objectives for improving data on race and ethnicity. The NCT also included a re-interview operation to further assess the accuracy of the question alternatives. The 2015 NCT is our primary mid-decade opportunity to compare different content strategies prior to the 2020 census. There are several main dimensions or goals for the 2015 NCT as it relates to race and ethnicity. One dimension is question format, as we continue to research the separate questions approach and the combined question approach. Another dimension examines the response categories by exploring how to collect and tabulate data for respondents of Middle Eastern or North African heritage. Additional dimensions pertain to the wording of instructions and to question terminology, through examining ways to optimize detailed reporting and to improve respondent understanding of the options to report multiple race and ethnic groups. And as an overarching dimension, we're using web-based technology with the internet, smartphones, and telephone to enhance question designs and optimize reporting of detailed racial and ethnic groups. Next, Mike will discuss the question format dimension and the results of the research.
Thanks, Nicholas. I'm excited to present the results of our research on testing alternative question formats for race and ethnicity to improve question design and data quality. My presentation will illustrate how different question format designs performed in the NCT research. As Nicholas mentioned, the NCT builds upon the successful strategies from the 2010 AQE research and undertakes further testing to examine several key dimensions for the questions on race and ethnicity. One key dimension is question format, as we continue to research the separate questions approach and the combined question approach. This dimension includes the overarching comparison of paper-based question designs and web-based question designs, with the advantage of technology such as the internet, including smartphones and tablets, to enhance question designs and optimize reporting of detailed racial and ethnic groups. Shown here on the screen are 3 examples of question formats tested on paper in the 2015 NCT. On the far left is the separate questions approach, similar to what was used in the 2010 decennial census, with a separate question for Hispanic origin and a separate question for race. In the middle is the combined question with write-ins approach, a format that was similar to what was also tested in the 2010 AQE. This combines race and Hispanic origin into one question, with distinguished write-in lines to elicit detail. Finally, on the far right of the screen is the combined question with detailed checkboxes approach, which again combines race and Hispanic origin into one question, this time with 6 detailed checkboxes and a write-in line to elicit detail. We begin with the race and ethnicity distribution by question format. One thing to point out is that in all of our analyses, we are looking at the results by each individual response mode: paper, telephone, and internet. We know from this test and past research, and we will see the same in 2020, that the demographics of respondents for each mode are different. So we want to understand, for instance, if there are differences by question format, but also if we are seeing similar differences across the different modes. We are primarily showing the results by question format for internet respondents. We'll note key findings from the other modes, though, when they are relevant. Note that these are alone or in combination groups, so they will add up to a little bit more than 100% due to multiple reporting. The blue bars are for the separate questions design, the red bars for combined question with write-in areas, and the green for combined question with detailed checkboxes. The main takeaway is that some of the race frequency is lower in the combined question formats than in the separate question format. We also note, as we have seen in previous research, such as with the 2010 alternative questionnaire experiment findings, that the level of white reporting is lower in the combined question formats. This reflects more of what we traditionally see as the non-Hispanic white population in the 2 separate Hispanic origin and race questions. Both of these results, again, are in line with previous findings. Next, we look at the distribution in a slightly different way, with the non-Hispanic race distribution in the middle and the Hispanic distribution split into 3 categories: Hispanic alone, Hispanic plus some other race, and Hispanic plus another major group. So what are the main takeaways? First, we see the differences between the separate and combined questions seen here is in part due to how Hispanic responses are edited, but we believe they are mainly due to Hispanics finding a category for themselves in the combined question. In a combined format, many Hispanic or Latinos just want to tell us that they are Hispanic and not anything else. The non-Hispanic groups have similar levels of reporting regardless of question format, particularly for non-Hispanic white, non-Hispanic black, and so on. Again, this is consistent with what we learned in the 2010 alternative questionnaire experiment research. Next, we examined, for people who reported as Hispanic, what was their race distribution. So, what were the main takeaways? First, we find that most Hispanics reported only a Hispanic response in the combined question. In fact, roughly 70% of Hispanic respondents on the combined question just reported that they were Hispanic. There are large differences in some of the race alone and 2 or more categories. These are in part due to differences in how Hispanic responses need to be coded and edited, but it's mainly due to the way Hispanics answer the separate race question. For people who want to just report that they are Hispanic or Latino, many struggle with how to answer the race question. Some are doing so in the sum of the race write-in field, while some will check white but also again say Hispanic in that write-in field or in one of the other write-in fields. Another key finding is that there are no differences among the question formats for Hispanics who identify as black or other race categories. This was a concern after the AQE results were released that, for example, Afro-Latinos would not report both black and Hispanic at the same rate with a combined format. As we can see, though, that is not the case. The next key metric that we are looking at for the analysis by question format is the level of item non-response. And here I want to note that we examined both missing and invalid responses, invalid meaning that they provided something uncodable, such as human or Martian, for example. Overall, non-response to the combined question is lower than non-response to the separate race question. Soft edits on the internet instrument do help reduce item non-response. So if a respondent tries to skip a question online, we prompt them once to please answer it, but we do not force a response. We found this to be very successful in reducing our item non-response. However, paper questions yielded a higher non-response rate for the separate Hispanic origin question and the separate race question, on the order of about 8% and 7% respectively. Additionally, and this is not shown on the slide, but among Hispanic respondents, 27% skipped the separate race question on paper. This did drop to about 2% of Hispanics who skipped the separate race question online. However, that was still significantly higher than the overall level of item non-response for the combined question format. Next, we look at the level of detailed reporting for each major group. So, for example, out of all people who identified as Asian, what percentage provided details such as Chinese or Cambodian? One finding from the 2010 AQE was that the tested combined question, similar to the NCT's combined question with write-in areas format, elicited less detail for Hispanics. That was primarily because the checkboxes were removed. And this is true here too. As you can see, the red bar is lower than the blue bar for Hispanic details. But the new combined version with checkboxes seems to help. In fact, the combined question with checkboxes elicits the same or more details than the separate questions format for every major group. Overall, internet results are consistent with what we observed for paper respondents and also for phone respondents, with one exception. The combined with detailed checkboxes format on paper showed lower levels of detailed reporting for the American Indian or Alaska Native population. We do believe this is a function of the detailed AIAN checkboxes representing the broader conceptual categories of American Indian, Alaska Native, and Central or South American Indian, and not more specific tribes like Navajo or Blackfeet, for example. We are looking into this further and also planning to take advantage of the opportunity to test a slightly different design for this category's collection of detailed responses in our upcoming 2017 census test, which focuses on the American Indian and Alaska Native populations. Lastly, we are now bringing in some of the re-interview results. We examine the level of consistent reporting. For those who are a given group, based on their re-interview, how many identified in the same way in the initial self-response phase? Largely, the results were very similar across the different question formats with few differences, and this is a good thing. We want to be able to elicit the same responses at point A and point B for each of our census data collections. We did, though, see significantly lower level of consistency for Hispanic respondents between the separate questions compared to the combined with checkboxes format. Finally, you may notice that some of the bars are lower for some of the smaller groups, such as AIAN, MENA, or NHPI. That is in part because those groups tend to be smaller in population size, and they also tend to be more multiracial. So, for example, someone who at one point may identify as white and Native Hawaiian, at another time may just want to tell us that they are Native Hawaiian, and maybe at another time just want to tell us that they are white. In summary, our preliminary findings show that the combined question with detailed checkboxes design appears to elicit higher quality data on race and ethnicity. These findings are in line with the results from the 2010 AQE. Specifically, we found that the combined question with detailed checkboxes design did not change the distribution for the major race and ethnicity groups, resulted in a decrease in some of the race reporting, resulted in lower item non-response rate than in the separate questions approach, produced the same or higher levels of detailed reporting, and there was higher overall consistency in reporting for Hispanics. Next, Nicholas will discuss the second dimension of our NCT research, testing the inclusion of a Middle Eastern or North African response category.
This dimension of the NCT research examines the response categories by exploring how to collect and tabulate data for respondents of Middle Eastern and North African heritage. Before we get started, I want to share a brief history about why we tested a Middle Eastern or North African category in the NCT. Since the mid-1990s, MENA community leaders and stakeholders have urged the U.S. Office of Management and Budget and the Census Bureau to add a separate response category for MENA respondents. These grassroots efforts have been critical to the testing of a MENA category. The Census Bureau and all federal statistical agencies follow the 1997 OMB standards for classifying and tabulating data on race and ethnicity. According to these standards, MENA responses to the question on race are classified as white. In 1997, OMB conducted a review and revision of the standards. During this review process, a number of requests were received from the public to add a new category for Arabs and Middle Easterners, but no agreement was reached on who should be included in the category. OMB did not add a new category, but recommended that further research be conducted on how to more accurately collect data for this population. The AQE and the NCT were both part of this research effort. Throughout the past several decades, the Census Bureau has been in continuous dialogue and consultation with external stakeholders and MENA community leaders. All of these conversations help frame and inform our research. Now let's talk about how the MENA response category was tested in the NCT. This graphic illustrates examples of two of the many research designs we tested in the NCT. The design on the left includes Middle Eastern or North African examples, such as Lebanese and Egyptian, within the white category. The design on the right places a distinct Middle Eastern or North African category, or MENA, among the options for selecting one or more race or ethnicity groups. We order the race and ethnicity groups based on population size, with the white population listed first as the initial category, as it has the largest population. You can see here that the MENA category falls between the American Indian or Alaska Native category and the Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander category. We placed the MENA category here based on the estimated population size of the MENA population from recent American Community Survey ancestry data. In preparation for the 2015 NCT, the Census Bureau determined which groups will be included in the MENA category for the purposes of the research. To do so, 15 organizations were identified because they had published classifications of the MENA region of the world. The organizations included research centers, universities, non-governmental organizations, as well as U.S. federal agencies. Next, after looking at these classifications, we determined which countries were in the majority, over 50%, of the classifications. Nationalities and ethnicities with origins in these countries were included in the working classification. Before we discuss the results, though, let's take a look at the list of groups that we classified as MENA for the 2015 NCT, and the groups that were also oversampled, as they could be considered MENA by some respondents. The census's working classification of MENA included all of the nationalities that were in more than half of the 15 classifications that we researched. There were 19 nationalities shown here on the top of the slide, such as Algerian, Iranian, Israeli, Jordanian, and Tunisian. We also included 11 transnational ethnic groups, general geographic terms, and pan-ethnicities, with origins tied to this region of the world. This was part of our NCT working classification for the MENA category, and the groups are shown here in the middle of the slide, including Assyrian, Kurdish, and Middle Eastern, as well as Arab. Additionally, as part of our oversampling for the NCT, we included groups that could potentially be considered as MENA by some respondents. This included 12 additional groups shown here on the slide, such as Afghan, Somali, and Turkish. Now let's look at some of the results from the 2015 NCT. Please note that for all of the results on the MENA category, we're showing the results for all modes because of the small MENA population size. This graph shows where MENA responses are reported by the presence of a MENA category. Now as we get started, I want to mention a few points. The universe is people who reported as MENA in the initial self-response for the NCT. The light orange bars represent questionnaires that did not have a distinct MENA category, while the dark orange bars represent question designs that included a distinct MENA category. And for the question designs that did not have a distinct MENA category, the white category showed Lebanese and Egyptian as examples or as checkboxes, if we're using the combined question with detailed checkboxes design. For the question designs that did include a distinct MENA category, the examples of Lebanese and Egyptian were shown with the MENA category. Additionally, we note that Somali was included as an example for the black category, as it is one of the largest groups in the U.S. from sub-Saharan Africa. Additionally, Israeli was included as an example for the MENA category, as it is one of the largest groups in the U.S. from the Middle East region. So, thinking back to the question designs that we've just showed, where half of the sample included a dedicated MENA category and the other half of the sample did not, here are our main takeaways. Many people who are MENA use the MENA category when it is available, nearly 80%. When no MENA category is present, the MENA ethnicity is usually reported in the white category, about 85%. We also see that there is less use of the some other race category when a MENA category is present. The next graphic shows the self-response reporting patterns of the MENA re-interview population by the presence of a MENA category. In this graphic, the universe is for people who reported as MENA in the NCT re-interview. We note that there are too few people in the missing or invalid category to show these results. The main findings here are that people who identify as MENA are not as easily able to indicate that they are only MENA when there is no distinct MENA category present than when there is. Some people who identify as MENA in the re-interview did not identify as MENA in the self-response return anywhere, even when a distinct MENA category is provided. Now, this could in part be caused by this being a new category and with respondents who are unfamiliar with the terminology not recognizing it. It could also be caused by the small sample size of this group, and also that members of the group are more likely to be multi-ethnic and may report they are MENA at one point in time, or may report, for example, that they are white or Asian at another point in time. This graphic shows where detailed responses that are included in the working classification of MENA were reported by the presence of a MENA category. We're unable to show results for all of the groups in the MENA working classification because of their small sample sizes. Even with our large NCT oversample, we recognize that many of these groups have very small populations in the United States. The detailed groups included in this graphic are included as either detailed checkboxes or examples in the various questionnaire designs when a MENA category was included. First, we look at detailed reporting of these groups when there was no MENA category included. As a reminder, in question designs without a MENA category, the white category included Lebanese and Egyptian as examples or detailed checkboxes. Pink indicates the response was provided in the white category. Green indicates the response was provided in the some other race category. Blue indicates the response was provided in the Black or African American category. And gray indicates the response was provided in another category, such as Asian, Hispanic, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, or American Indian or Alaska Native. A major takeaway is that people who identify with the detailed MENA groups in the working classification identify as white when no MENA category is available. For example, when no MENA category was available, about 80% of Iranians provided this detail of Iranian in the white category. Similarly, over 96% of Algerians provided their detailed Algerian response in the white category when no MENA category was available. Next, on the right side of the slide, we look at detailed reporting of the same groups when a MENA category is included in the question design. Here, the orange indicates the response was provided in the MENA category. People who identify with detailed MENA groups in the working classification use the MENA category when it is available. Looking at the same groups that we did earlier, when there was a MENA category, we found that 85% of Iranians provided their detailed Iranian response in the MENA category. We also see that over 80% of Algerians provided their detailed Algerian response in the MENA category. The major takeaway from this is that groups in the MENA classification identify as MENA using the MENA category when the category for MENA is available. Now let's examine how groups not in the MENA working classification reported their detailed ethnicities by the presence of a MENA category. Remember that we oversampled for groups that some people may consider to be MENA. The detailed groups included in this graph are groups that are not in the MENA working classification, but groups that were included in the MENA oversample. These groups are recommended to us by stakeholders, research, and through the Federal Register Notice comment process as groups that should be considered for inclusion in a MENA classification. Like in the previous graphic, we're not able to show results for all of the groups in the MENA oversample because of their small population size in the U.S. First, we look at detailed reporting of these groups when there was no MENA category included. In general, people who identify with detailed groups in the MENA oversample identify as either white or identify as Black. For example, when no MENA category is available, about 90% of Armenians provided this detail of Armenian in the white category. We also see that about 98% of Somalis provided their detail of Somali in the Black category when no MENA category was available. Again, as we noted before, Somali was also an example for the Black category. Next, on the right side of the slide, we look at detailed reporting of the same groups when a MENA category is included. Overall, people who identify with groups in the oversample do not use the MENA category when it is available. Let's look again at Armenian and Somali respondents. For Armenian respondents, we see that about 70% of them reported Armenian in the white category, while the other 30% reported Armenian in the MENA category and in other categories such as Asian or some other race. For Somali respondents, 94% of them reported their Somali response in the Black category, even when a MENA category was included. In summary, our findings show that the use of a distinct Middle Eastern or North African category appears to elicit higher quality data for people who identify as Middle Eastern or North African. Specifically, the results show that people who identify as MENA use the MENA category when it is available. People who identify as MENA have trouble identifying as only MENA when no MENA category is available. The nationalities and ethnicities in the 2015 NCT Working Classification of MENA identified as MENA when the category was available. And the nationalities and ethnicities in the MENA oversample did not identify as MENA when the category was available. Next, Mike will discuss how we examined alternative wording of instructions as well as question terminology in the NCT research.
Thank you. As Nicholas just said, I will be discussing the ways that we explored how to improve the instruction wording and question terminology with the 2015 NCT research. Regarding the instructions and terminology dimension, this slide shows what we tested in the NCT. For instruction wording, we tested the traditional instructions of mark one or more boxes against instructions to mark all boxes that apply without the X, along with noting you may report more than one group. For question terminology, we tested the traditional what is your race or origin terminology versus what is your race or ethnicity versus having no conceptual terms at all and instead asking which categories describe you.
Before being implemented in the field, all census materials and questionnaires must be developed and tested to make certain that messages and communications are culturally appropriate, accurately reflect intent, and are accessible to everyone, including individuals who speak languages other than English. In other words, all materials and questionnaires go through cognitive testing and usability testing. For the 2015 National Content Test, the Census Bureau's Center for Survey Measurement and RTI International conducted cognitive and usability testing in both English and Spanish. 40 of the interviews were with Spanish-speaking respondents to explore how they understood the translated question terminology of ethnicity, with what is person one's race or ethnicity, and with categories, which categories describe person one. The qualitative research found similar results in Spanish for both ethnicity and for categories. For ethnicity in Spanish, respondents indicated that the terms race or raza and ethnicity or origen étnico had the same meaning, and they were interpreted as one's roots or where a person was born or one's ancestry. In the Spanish language testing, some of the respondents indicated that the term categorías meant a hierarchical listing of options in which the ordering of the options implied a ranking, or a meaning not found in its English translation, or that it was a hierarchical order of ranking rather than a natural list of options. They also thought that this meant a social status or a hierarchy. Therefore, based on this qualitative research, we decided to move forward with the terminology of race and ethnicity in the question stem.
In addition to new instructions, we can say that the race-ethnicity terminology elicits higher quality data. Specifically, the results show that only one major race and ethnicity group had a significant difference when instructions were changed from old to new with the race origin terminology, and all other distributions were not statistically significant. The new instructions perform better for reporting multiple groups, and all other distributions, again, were not statistically significant. As Nicholas reported, qualitative research findings showed that race and ethnicity terminology was better understood than categories terminology in Spanish. Now I'm going to hand the presentation back to Nicholas to discuss our conclusions and next steps for the research.
Thanks, Mike. The 2015 NCT provides a critical opportunity to compare the success of different question designs to determine how they perform in new web-based data collections and methods that we're testing for the 2020 census using the internet, smartphone, and telephone response options. Following the goals of a re-engineered 2020 census, our main focus is on testing the fully factorial components of each dimension via web-based designs. Each component is included in the various paths of the web-based designs so that every scenario is tested. We thoroughly examine the results that we've talked about today to determine which question versions perform better than others. As the decisions for the different research dimensions were made, they guided us to a pointed outcome on which question designs performed best. As described earlier, our main finding regarding question format demonstrated that the question design with a combined question with detailed checkboxes performed best. As part of our ongoing work with the U.S. Office of Management and Budget and a federal interagency working group for research on race and ethnicity, the Census Bureau and other federal agencies are discussing the NCT results, other data inputs, as well as feedback from the public through the Federal Register notice process. Ultimately, OMB will decide how to move forward with guidance on question format for race and ethnicity. Another dimension of the NCT research was to evaluate the testing of a Middle Eastern or North African response category. Half of the NCT designs tested a design approach without a distinct MENA category. The other half of the designs all tested a design approach where a distinct MENA category was present. The NCT research demonstrated that including a dedicated Middle Eastern or North African response category performed best. Again, ultimately it will be up to the U.S. Office of Management and Budget to determine if the MENA response category will be a minimum reporting category that is distinct from the white category. Under the current OMB standards on race and ethnicity, MENA responses are aggregated to the white category. OMB is currently conducting a review of these standards, and it will be OMB's decision as to whether or not MENA will become a new minimum reporting category outside of the white category response option. Another dimension of the NCT research was to evaluate the testing of old instructions and new instructions. Half of the NCT designs tested a design approach with old instructions to mark one or more boxes. The other half of the designs employed new instructions to mark all boxes that apply and note that more than one group may be selected. Based on the NCT research findings, we've determined that the new instructions to mark all boxes that apply or select all boxes that apply in terms of online instructions, and to also note that more than one group may be selected, perform best. The final dimension of the NCT research evaluated the analytical questions for the dimension regarding the use of different terminology to collect data on race and ethnicity. We examined which question format performed best: race origin versus race ethnicity versus no terms at all and using categories. The terminology approach with race ethnicity and the use of question approaches where no terms were employed with categories both performed as well as the race origin question terminology. But a decision needed to be made about which terminology should be employed for future data collections. The NCT cognitive and usability research indicated that the use of categories in data collections conducted in Spanish caused some confusion among Spanish-speaking respondents who thought that categories presented a more hierarchical ordering of groups rather than a list of options. Therefore, based on both the NCT statistical research and this cognitive research, we've determined that the terminology of race ethnicity performed best for the combined question terminology in both English and Spanish data collections. Finally, we'll discuss what we learned from this research about the optimal elements for race and ethnicity data. What this slide depicts is a new image of how all of these different elements that we talked about today come together in one design. The combined question with detailed checkboxes design supported the NCT research objectives of increasing reporting within the current OMB categories, decreasing item non-response, improving accuracy and reliability, and achieving similar or higher levels of detailed reporting for all major groups. The results of this research indicate that the optimal question format is a combined question with detailed checkboxes design. The results of the research indicate that it is optimal to use a dedicated Middle Eastern or North African response category. Under the current OMB standards for race and ethnicity, MENA responses are aggregated to the white category. OMB is currently conducting a review of these standards, and it will ultimately be OMB's decision as to whether or not MENA will become a new minimum reporting category that is distinct from the white category. The results of the NCT research indicate that it is optimal to use the new instructions to mark all that apply on paper data collections, and to use the new instructions to select all that apply on instructions for internet data collections. These new instructions performed as well, or in some instances better than, the old instructions to mark one or more boxes for the reporting of multiple race and ethnicity groups. In addition, the new instructions yielded similar or higher consistency in the reporting of major race and ethnicity groups. The results of this research, in conjunction with previous qualitative research, indicate that it is optimal to use the race-ethnicity terminology for the combined question design. The terminology approach with race-ethnicity and the use of question approaches where no terms were employed, categories, both performed as well as the race-origin question terminology. But again, a decision needed to be made about which terminology should be employed for future data collections. Our NCT cognitive and usability research indicated that the use of categories in data collections conducted in Spanish caused some confusion among Spanish-speaking respondents who thought categories presented a more hierarchical ordering of groups rather than a list of options. We use the instruction to mark all boxes that apply, and we use the terminology race or ethnicity for the question stem. You can see all of these design elements in the question design on the screen.
Thank you, Nicholas. Finally, let's discuss next steps. We have released the final results from the 2015 NCT research on race and ethnicity on our Census Bureau website. We encourage you to read the report and to learn more about the findings. To access the report, please visit census.gov/2020census. Then select the 2020 Census Memorandum Series link and open the report, which is titled 2015 National Content Test Race and Ethnicity Analysis Report.
This extensive 2015 NCT research study has built successfully upon years of empirical research, coupled with collaboration, outreach, and engagement with organizations like those that you see here. Feedback, questions, and encouragement from the stakeholders in the public has enabled this research to reach the point where it is today. Collectively, this research and this engagement will help ensure that the 2020 census is in the best position possible to collect and produce the highest quality statistics about our nation's diverse population. As we move forward, we continue to meet with stakeholders about this important research, and we will be discussing the results with them to receive feedback as we develop plans for the 2020 census content on race and ethnicity. We would like to engage with you too. Please share your thoughts and feedback with us. As part of our ongoing work with the U.S. Office of Management and Budget and the Federal Interagency Working Group for Research on Race and Ethnicity, the Census Bureau and other federal agencies will be in dialogues with OMB about the NCT results, other data inputs, and feedback from the public through the Federal Register notice process to discuss and develop solutions to recommend to OMB. Ultimately, OMB will decide how to move forward with guidance on question format for race and ethnicity. Final question wording on the 2020 census content must be submitted to Congress by April of 2018. This extensive research, collaboration, outreach, and engagement will help ensure that the 2020 census provides the highest quality statistics about our nation's diverse population. We encourage you to stay involved and let us know what you think about this important research.
If you have any questions or if your organization would like to become involved and talk with us about the research findings, please contact our Public Information Office on 301-763-3030 or via email at pio@census.gov. We hope this presentation has helped to introduce you with the results of the 2015 NCT research on race and ethnicity. Thank you for your interest in the 2015 NCT research.